Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm Emil Ovbiagele.
And I'm Kristen Hardy, and we're your hosts. This is the Bottom Up Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Bottom Up Podcast. Today I have a friend of mine who's offered his time to talk to us about some pretty interesting stuff, attorney Nate Cade. And today we're going to be talking about what we like to call taking extreme ownership of one's career. Attorney Nate Cade is the owner and founder of Cade Law Group, which is a civil litigation law firm in town. Has a very interesting background, and I'm not going to, at the risk of not hitting all the highlights of his industrious career and very rewarding and successful career, we're going to have Nate talk to us about it and tell us about himself. Nate, happy to have you on the show. How's it going?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's going great.
All right. So, Nate, introduce yourself to our viewers and audience.
Again, my name is Nate Cade. I'm an attorney in my, I guess it's 27th year here in Milwaukee. I'm getting old. I have the gray hair.
You're getting old, right?
Yeah. And just love being an attorney, love being a litigator.
But you're older than Joe. And Joe, our producer over here, he's all gray. He's got the whole like Anderson Cooper thing going on.
More stress.
Stop being stressed, Joe. Well, hey, yeah, kind of give us a highlight of your career. So you've been practicing 27 years, primarily in Wisconsin. You know, how did we get to today? Let's start from the beginning.
Wow. Okay, so I was born on a Friday, which actually it was. No, graduated University of Michigan Law School, and I was fortunate. I'm not from Wisconsin. I have zero ties to the state.
Where are you from originally?
Originally from Detroit, Michigan.
Oh.
And
same place as Kristen.
Yes.
Okay.
She's a little bit younger. But a very good friend of mine, an attorney, local attorney here, Walter Lanier, was a year ahead of me, and he had suggested that I interview at the firm that he had worked at as a summer associate, Milwaukee-based in Friedrich. And I'd come to Milwaukee. I'd interviewed with a couple firms already. I'm like, I don't know. And he kept insisting, and I said, fine.
So during law school or after law school?
During law school. So second year in law school. So I interviewed Milwaukee-based, got a position, was a summer associate, and enjoyed it. Told my then girlfriend, now wife, Milwaukee, and she said, what? But all worked out, got an offer, came here. I worked there for 15 years, I believe, in litigation, mostly doing products liability and commercial litigation. Then I went from Milwaukee-based to a now defunct firm, Gonzalez Saja in Harlan, for 2 years. Smaller in size, but bigger in terms of footprint because they had 15, 16 offices. And right after I joined, they asked me to be the general counsel. So not only was I a partner, but also the general counsel of the firm. And that took a lot of time. And I did that for about 2 years. And in March of 2013, I went out on my own. Never looked back.
Oh, wow. So you've been on your own now for about 10 years.
10 years.
Oh, geez. So what do you do right now?
Well, right now we mostly do civil rights and employment litigation. I would say 85% of our work is plaintiff-oriented, and we try to hopefully right wrongs.
Wow. I mean, obviously, you've had some pretty high-profile cases in the last couple of years, at least on the civil rights side of things. For example, that's sort of how our relationship started. I'd reached out to you. I remember I was trying to build a practice in the civil rights space, and I was going through my Rolodex, and I don't have a Rolodex.
I don't even know if people know what Rolodex is anymore.
It just felt good to say. And I'm thinking, I'm like, hey, who are the people who I know that are hot in this space? I knew Mark Thompson, yourself, and I reached out. I knew Mark already, and I reached out to you. And I think it was a random question. You picked up the phone. I told you who I was, expecting you to sort of get off with some excuse, because I'm like, who's this kid with a weird last name calling me, wanting, demanding my time? But you didn't, right? And you spoke to me about it, about what I was trying to do, and gave me some advice. I think at the time you had just concluded the trial, a successful trial on a police brutality case that made headlines. And so, like, how did you fall into that particular niche?
Well, previously, while I was at, maybe I was still at Michael Best, but definitely while I was at Gonzales Saggio, I had some pro bono assignments. And I had a pro bono case that I was court appointed. We did a trial, and I don't want to say the bug hit you, but you kind of realize there's a large number of people out there who don't have legal representation. And, you kind of go from there and, you just kind of build. So I did that. So that was, 12, 13 years ago. And over time, it just kind of blossomed. You start getting, once you have success, you get more and more stuff. You don't advertise, you just get phone calls. So.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Oh, we just had my co-host Kristen Hardy step in. She's about 30 minutes late.
I'm not that late. After I asked for it to be moved up. But hi, Nate. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Thank you for giving us your time. Really appreciate it. I'm usually not late. It's usually Emil, but I was on a call. I couldn't get off of it.
I plead the fifth on that one. We got two people from Detroit in the house.
Oh, yeah.
It's problematic.
No, another fun fact?
What's another fun fact?
We went to two of the same elementary schools. Not at the same time.
Why am I even here?
Two of the same elementary schools. Like, can you believe it?
Wow, that's crazy.
No, you were Jesu and
St. Bede.
St. Bede, yeah.
Yep. I just think they're private schools.
Yeah.
St. Bede doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
But
Yeah, that was in the suburbs. Jesu was a Detroit Catholic high school or Catholic school, 1st through 8th grade.
Yep.
And
K through 8. I started in
K through 8.
kindergarten.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow.
I did Montessori, so I didn't know about
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I lived over there, so it still exists.
Nate, all right. So, we're talking about you started off your career at Big Law, and that was about 17 years ago now, and now you're on this totally different path. Now, Big Law to going solo, and then building a smaller firm. Those are two extremes, at least within our worlds. So, how did that happen?
It was a lot of prayer.
You don't pray, do you?
Occasionally.
I don't think you go to church.
Occasionally.
I mean, I'm Christian, but I thought you were.
Well, if you want to talk religion,
you're too woke to be Christian.
my mother used to be a nun.
Really?
Whoa.
My mother did 4 years. She was the Oblate Sisters of Providence out of Baltimore. So, and I was married by a bishop. So I'll see you and double down.
All right, you win.
I'm sorry?
You win. The Holy Ghost is with you.
So, you kind of come to, like anything, a lot of it is clients, but a lot of it is also having the knowledge of knowing people. And it's amazing. I find that, not just in my case, but everybody I know who is somewhere and they might go on their own, once they announce that, a lot of people will give them cases or forward or give their name out. And, I had a lot of clients when I left. A lot of them came with me. Some of them didn't. And some of the ones that didn't come with me contacted me later. So I was able to make a go at it. I mean, it was never, I never felt threatened, or I never felt in the sense of, we're going to starve. Obviously, my wife is like looking at me like, what the hell have you done? But I always seem to feel that it worked out. And I think a lot of that is being involved in the bar, getting to know people. It's not that being in the bar is the reason. You're in the bar and you get to know people. So I think that's the key, is just having a name, a reputation, whether you're having lunch or breakfast with somebody, an occasional after-work drink, starting to know people, get to know them, know a little bit about their career. That's what tends to help you with the client. So I never had a problem, and it's just kind of grown from there.
So I guess this is the litigator in me. So you talked about, the reasons why it wasn't a hard transition, but you haven't talked to me about the why. Like, why did you make that change? You didn't do it because the bar association was there, or because you had built a good clientele base, or because you had. There is a why. Oftentimes, when you make such drastic change, when one decides to make such a drastic change in direction, there's a very prominent why.
There is a prominent why, but that's more of a Fifth Amendment taking there was an issue that came up, and it was one of those where my former employer and I decided we should part ways. And that's a conversation that you and I can have.
Yeah, but thinking about this, and I don't want the specifics, but you could have gone back to Big Law. You had.
Oh, sure.
So I'm talking about the why of, I'm done with Big Law, I want to start my own. That's the why I'm thinking about.
Well, no matter the firm, I mean, at the end of the day, for the most part, most firms are very similar. And they're similar in the sense of, once you get to be a certain size, you have teams and groups. It's the Jeff Bezos calls it the 2 pizza team, right? So they started Amazon with a group of people enough so they order 2 large pizzas. I mean, that's pretty much it. And once you get too big, then you start having managers, and then you have a lot more oversight. But it doesn't. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter the firm. I mean, you just change the name, and it's still the same thing, right? There's still a certain set of rules. There's a certain way things are done. And no matter how a firm, when they get to be big, says, oh, this is my partner and that's my partner, at the end of the day, they're still fiefdoms, right? I mean, unless you have a big enough book of business to control your work, you're working for somebody. And you're doing their work. So whether you're every law firm, it's a minder, finder, grinder, right? You fit into one of those buckets. It's rare that you're a finder, meaning a big rainmaker, and a grinder. Those are very hard. But you can be a rainmaker and a manager of work. You can be a manager of work and a grinder, right? So you can kind of meld, but you can't go from one extreme to the other. But every firm pretty much has that, and it doesn't matter. You can name the 20, 30 biggest large firms in Milwaukee, Madison, wherever, and it's still going to be, there's a large enough group that they bring in all the work, there's another group that manages the work, and there's another group that does the work.
So it sounds like there was something about that system that no longer worked for you.
At the end of the day, I had already done 17 years, so you start to say, is there something else? And I thought I could do different. I mean, I've been virtual for 10 years. And, that I thought was a bigger change, going out on my own, not having physical office space, because I got to, I remember before I went on my own, my wife wanted to meet for lunch for something. And she said, hey, let's meet over here, and it wasn't downtown. And all I could think of, it's going to take me so long to walk in my car. Literally, I'm thinking in 0.1, so it's going to be 0.3 to get to my car. It's going to be this, and I had mapped out getting out of the parking structure and meeting her, the time to come back to get to my office, and you start to say, this is ridiculous. And then I started thinking about how many times clients really wanted, that you were physically in their office. I'll say to Kristen, they have some outside counsel, not a ton, but even in her prior outside counsel roles, I highly doubt there were instances where the lawyers came to them. They often went to the lawyers and had meetings. Okay, so over a 90-day period, I would say for some lawyers, how many clients do you really have come in? 3, 5? It's a very small, it's not every day. So you don't need to have office space. You don't need to have, all of the marble and the glass and the accoutrements and things like that.
Thanks.
And so I thought I could
told me that before I bought my building, right?
Yeah, but you've got a historic building. That's different. That's different. But you think a little bit differently, and I thought, I can do some things, and there's some things that I'd like to do. I don't have the conflicts of interest like before. You line up. I've had really great, wonderful, very large companies, and then you come to find out, oh yeah, we can't bring that on. Even after I ran conflicts, then I find out someone else didn't put a name in, and you can't. And you're like, I've busted my butt for so long developing this person that I knew. They worked their way up. They're giving me work, and now you're telling me no. Mm-hmm. At some point, that system is rigged.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our podcast sponsor, Wilmick. Put your trust in your premium with a legal malpractice carrier that supports legal associations and events. Wilmick, insuring and supporting the legal community since 1986.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
So I want to talk about some of the challenges or setbacks you had going out for being in this one system for 17 years, be it as it may, imperfect. The challenge is now you become a solo and you're doing your own thing, even though you've been practicing a long time. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the biggest challenge was when I first did it, I did not have a secretary. And that it wasn't horrible, but I'd done some stuff of my own. I could type my own letters, things of that nature, but you don't realize how much help you have. Mm-hmm. And I will say it might be hard for people to kind of fathom where we were, 10, 15 years ago. But, someone to respond to clients. So when they called, so they had a live person to speak to, Mr. Cade's not in, he's in court, he's whatever, can I take a message? Someone who can kind of talk a little bit about the cases and where we're at. Someone to handle the filing to that extent. So that was probably the toughest thing in terms of a challenge. For the most part, like it was then and it is now, a lot of my clients I've never met. I've represented some very large corporations where I've never met inside counsel. I've been doing Zoom since it started, but you don't need to, if they're out of town, you don't necessarily physically have to go and meet with them, and people are comfortable doing it by phone or video. And I think it's just more incumbent on the lawyer getting used to that end of the technology. So that was never hard, but it was not having the help. And, what do you do next? And then, 5, 6 o'clock rolls around and you have a pile of paper. Now what do? You're either filing on the weekends or, you don't have anything to fall back on. So in some respects, it's tough when you're on your own. If you want to do, whether it's pro bono, if you want to do volunteer work, every day that I'm not billing or bringing in is not today, but in 3 months, 6 months, a hit to my income. So if I volunteer today, those 2-3 hours down the road, that's something that I'm not collecting. And so you got to balance that, and hopefully you can get it so that it's a very even month to month for cash flow and everything else.
Nate, why did you want something different?
Why did I want you get a little too comfortable, and it was fine, but it really wasn't. I wasn't excited. I wasn't waking up eager, and I get up very early. I get up like Emil. I'm up at 4:06. That's my alarm.
So Nate has a thing. He's always making fun of me every time I post workout videos. It's just a regular born hater.
Emil, so.
Yeah, it's not a thirst trap or something. I don't know why he thinks it is.
Just hating. So, you're my inspiration. Your critique is. So you said you just
want to do something different, and you wake up one day and you say, maybe you go in house, maybe you go work for the government, maybe you do something non-law related. 10 years ago, I was 42, so you turn around and it's kind of like a midlife crisis maybe. I didn't buy a sports car, so I had to do something.
No motorcycle either?
No motorcycle. No jumping out of planes.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, go on.
I'm curious, if you were talking to law school, Nate, what's some advice that you would impart on him?
Someone in law school?
No, you
in
law school.
Oh. What would I say to myself?
Like knowing all these things you know now about the firm and about going solo. Would you have gone solo sooner? Would you have taken a different path? Like, what does that advice look like?
I don't know if I would have taken a different path, and I don't know if I would have done it sooner. You like a lot of things, you get a certain comfort level, and I think I was comfortable in doing what I did when I did it. The problem with, I never want to look back and have regret, because you made the best choice you could at the time when you made it. But, there are other issues. I had a mortgage, I have kids, a wife, student loan payments. There are things that get in the way that you can't just, it's a lot different if it was just me. Right. I can fail and, wash dishes.
Right.
But it's hard to fail when you've got everybody looking at you like, what do you mean the TV got turned off? What do you mean there's, we're eating ramen again tonight kind of thing. So I don't know if I would necessarily change anything or give my younger self advice.
I guess at some point your dreams must meet the reality of your circumstances. I mean, that has to. There's a point where those two things come together.
It's very philosophical.
I'll say that's deep. Was that on a fortune cookie or?
I came up with that all by myself in the moment, inspired by what Nate just said. But I think about that too, right? Because, and I'm also I try to be mindful when I talk to folks to tell them, hey, go be your best self. Just go do it. You want to do this? Yeah, those things are great, and there's a lot of that out there. But there is a reality of things, right? In your circumstance at the time, moving to Wisconsin with no book of business, knowing practically no one. Let's say you had moved down, right, with a family, with student loans, and then just hanging your shingle. I'm not saying folks don't do that and can't make it doing that, but under those circumstances, just wouldn't have been realistic. The reality of your circumstance required you to make certain choices, and you just made the best choice and decided, okay, I'm here. I'm going to make the best out of it. I'm going to enjoy it. Because that's the thing, right? There is this idea, especially in this dream-laden world where people are so, they are so fed up, or they choose to not appreciate the reality of now, and they're always constantly looking to the dream that lies ahead. And the thing about it is, like, well, dreams are dreams, right? And they have to be curated. And there is no version of your dream when it comes true that is just the way you dreamt it. Most of the time, it usually comes. I'm sure no one's ever, every time generals plan for war, the idea is that we're going to win. The dream is we're going to win, and there'll be zero casualties.
Well, Mike Tyson, I think, said it best. Everyone has a plan till you get punched in the mouth.
Right?
Right?
Exactly.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Help protect your family's future with term life. State Bar of Wisconsin members can apply for life insurance in a matter of minutes. Coverage is issued by the Prudential Insurance Company of America. To learn more, visit wisbar.memberenroll.com. That is wisbar.memberenroll.com.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
But you do, I know we were talking before the taping began. It's one of those things where I think the younger folks, and just generally, you've got to kind of, no one's going to turn around and describe for you your career path. There's no, you show up day one and they say, here, everything is laid out. So you've got to kind of look forward and say, what is it that I want to do? And you're never going to be perfect, and your plans change. You come to a fork in the road and you got to decide which way you're going to go. And you may go the wrong way, and you backtrack, and using, if you're in-house, you're along a certain career path, and people are saying, hey, you're going to be the next general counsel, and you can see a path, and all of a sudden there's a new CEO, and they get rid of the general counsel, and someone else comes in, and your path is limited. So, you may have to backtrack, you may have to move, you may have to, things change, but you should always be planning. And by that, you also have to, I love being in court. I just, beyond anything else, if I had my dream, I would try 5-6 cases a year. Everybody else would do the pretrial work and everything, and then say, here's some depots, here's some stuff, and try the case, right? That to me would be a dream. And, there are places like that. I know some lawyers who that's all they do, and that to me is a dream. But you also have to turn around and, years ago I wanted to argue in the Seventh Circuit, but I didn't have gray hair. And so it's difficult as an associate to say, oh yeah, let me go argue this valuable case down in the Court of Appeals. No one does that. So, I said, okay, I got to get experience. So you start doing the pro bono work, and you sign up for that. And that's the kind of thing where you're still billing your 2,000 hours, but you're also, I would have back when we had librarians, go print out these cases, and they'd print out the cases, and I would read them at night in front of the TV. So at least I'm physically present with my wife, and I'd read 2, 3, 4 cases, take some notes, and you do that for a couple of weeks. Now you've kind of do the outline, and it's really when you're writing the brief that you're really the focused, and maybe you're putting aside the billable work. But you can't just say, oh, I want to do that and not bill, because that's how you're getting paid. And it doesn't have to be legal work. If you turn around and say, I want to be a DJ, okay, you still have to work during the week, but then you have to say, okay, how do I get into the certain clubs? And if it's a Thursday night thing, you're going to set it up so Friday morning you're not having early morning meetings, right? And you plan out your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. What does that look like? It's, as you said, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be on year 10. This was exactly what I planned. But you start that process, you manifest it, you get out there, you volunteer, you do the things, you bring in that type of work that eventually can get you there.
I was just talking over lunch today, actually. It's one of our electeds who was saying something really similar to what you said, and it reminded me even when he said it. You always have to have a plan because it's your career on your career. It's very much so like that if you are a public servant, you're elected to serve the people. What's next? It's like, okay, you get this position, then what do you do? Then you get this one, then what do you do? Sometimes there's no path forward, or sometimes there is. You go to a law firm, you're an associate, one assumes one day you want to become a partner. That's the path for many people. Some people say, I want to go in-house. But then what happens when you fall off the rails and you can't make your hours? So you probably aren't going to be a partner. It's not going to work out like that for you. So then what do you do? So I think that's important. That's an important point that you made, but it's even more so important as we move in our career to not forget that. Because you can be, practicing law for 20 years and still we're always, I think it's our nature, like what's next? I want more. What's the challenge? And a lot of your story, what I'm hearing, Nate, is, you wanted more of the challenge, or a new challenge.
A different challenge.
A different challenge.
Yeah,
and I think that's important. That's important for our listeners to hear. That's important for young lawyers to hear.
For anyone.
For anyone, frankly. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand that or to respect that type of advice.
Yeah, and so if I hear you correctly, Nate, this idea of extreme ownership of one's career is maybe the sort of realization that the cavalry isn't coming, or at least may not come, and that as cliche as it might sound, your career, with a big emphasis on your, is what you decide to make of it. And But speaking with lots of law school students, and also being in law school and being a younger lawyer, it's never sold as that. And my own idea and my hypothesis, and please feel free to disagree with me as someone who has a wide range of experiences, it's because the idea of law school and the idea of young lawyers is still very shaped by how things work in big law. The career paths, because its idea is, well, yeah, just get in here and everything else happens, right? You can get in here, that means some partner's going to get old or die or whatever, and then magically you have a bunch of clients that you never worked for, or that you worked on, right? And then you're great, right? You're going to have the night, and I very early on, so Kristen and I were in the same class, and I think we kind of figured that, I did the math. I think the first day I realized this was when I read the Wisconsin Lawyer magazine. That's when they usually print out the percentage of lawyers who are in large law firms and whatever. And I think it's like 10%. And so I'm like, what happens to the other 90? Like, why are we selling a dream based solely on the experiences of what 10% of folks will experience and might experience? So does that mean we're just condemned to a lifetime of not knowing exactly what we are going to do, or are we going to be deemed failures? So that idea, I think, of just, hey, I'm just going to get here and I don't have to think about my career. All I have to do is get in here, I think is shaped in law school. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely shaped in law school.
That seed's planted in law school, I should say.
Yeah, when I was at Michigan, the career planning and placement, they focused very heavily on big firms. We had obviously coming out of school like Michigan, there's a very large percentage of people who go to big firms. But what they don't tell you is how many of them are still in a big firm 3 years, 5 years, 10 years later. And looking back, I get the alumni magazine. I can safely say I was probably one of the last 5%, 8% still at the same firm after 15 years where, they go to a firm and then they're there for a few years and they go to somewhere else or maybe smaller, maybe in-house, whatever. They don't necessarily tell you that there are career paths, and it's okay to get off the big firm train, being on a partner, to go in-house or to government, and then get a certain level of experience, certain credentialing, and then you can come back or you can do something else. You can use that. The focus, I agree, is just basically, if you show up, everything takes care of itself. And I disagree. I don't think it takes care of itself because, firms, no matter how big the firm is, they can only take on so many associates. And then if you imagine whether it's 3, 5, 10 every year, they're not growing like that. So at some point there's attrition. And I think once you realize that there's attrition, that it's the Titanic, if you will. I don't want to say it's sinking, but there's only so many deck chairs, and you've got to kind of figure out, it would be great if I'm one of the people who gets a chair, but maybe I don't get a chair. Maybe I've got to veer off, and thinking about your career, because they're not the ones who are paying your mortgage 10 years down the road if you don't have a job with them. So you've got to figure out, what do I want to do? How am I going to get there? What does that take?
And now, a word from our sponsors. The Ultimate Pass truly is an ultimate deal. With access to everything State Bar of Wisconsin Pinnacle produces for CLE, all for one low price. Learn about your options at wisbar.org/ultimate pass. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
What are we going to do about law schools? I don't know how we're going to do it. But just generally, like planting that seed, and that continues to be the path forward. We continue to push that. Law schools continue to push that. They continue to follow that model. This is probably at any school. You can pick the school, whether it's a regional school or it's a T15. They have the same model of, all right, you do good your first semester, so you need to try to go OCI. You need to go into the big law firm.
The rest of your life can be shaped by your first year.
And I get it to some extent, right? People have lots of debt, and maybe that's the best path forward. But just wonder, what are we going to do about? It's more to life than that. But
you got to realize, though, it's very easy, right? It's easy because you invite some of the big firms to come on campus, and that solves a lot of your problems for on-campus interviewing, or even for people to donate to the school right after they graduate. They get a good job, they're making good income, they're more likely to donate. And I do agree. I think they do a poor job of that. The joke, I remember talking to someone in career planning when I was in law school, and I had a good friend. He'd gotten horrible grades first year, horrible. And they did nothing for him. And I don't want to say they ignored him, but I always thought, that's the person that OCI should be pushing, the on-campus folks, to get the job. You get that person a job, that's a debt they can never repay.
Right.
The person who's at the top of the class in law review, instead of like slapping behind the back, oh yeah, we're so proud of, yeah, we're proud of course everybody's, but they're going to get a job. They're going to be just fine. But the bottom 10, 15, 20%, you help them, those are the people that's a blood debt that can never be repaid.
Kristen, though, I think you answered your own question, though, in a sense. Think about it. What's the product being sold, and how expensive is that product? The only way to justify the obnoxious price of education in this country, and even there more so for law school, is to push the one place where it's okay to be $150,000 in debt. Because guess what? Upon graduation,
You'll make $250.
you're going to make, exactly, right?
Year.
So, and obviously we know that if you look at the math along your career path, by the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th year, income stabilize, and it all depends on what you know and how much experiences you have, right? It doesn't matter where you started off from to a large extent. So it's that initial push. So the reason they push it, in my opinion, And the reason they create this patent, this idea of the path, is because it's the only thing that could justify the product, the expense of the product that's been sold. So that way, it's like, well, I could go $200,000 in a debt because I'm going to start off making $120,000, $140,000 right out of law school.
But it's like you already got them. I hope, our producers do one of those little fancy videos where they have the words up on the screen after and like hit that point that Nate said about if the schools are so focused on you're doing well, you're going to go to the big law firm, you're going to give me money, right? Because that's important. The alumni network, it is important. And I understand it because schools they're businesses to some extent. But if you helped out that person at the bottom of the class and they get a job and they go on and do well, and we know this happens all the time where people who didn't do great in law school, they go on and they do well. Maybe it's practicing law, maybe it's not, but they do well. If you help them, they would always say, oh, man, my law school had my back. I'll give you whatever you need every year. So put some words and a picture and a still so that the law schools can see that because I think you're on to something with that thought process.
Yeah, I will say, though, that in recent times, for example, at least at Marquette, my alma mater, I think the career department has been doing a better job at that. I've had folks from the career department reach out to me with certain candidates that they believe their grades don't tell the full story and say, hey, and that means a lot,
That's
right?
good.
To say, hey, I think I know you, I know what you guys do, I know this person, and I think that there are more to their grades. Speaking of which, during the MBA or the state bar just had its diversity clerkship interviews.
Correct.
I had a lawyer who's in-house who knows me, who reached out to me and connected me with a student and says, hey, I interviewed this guy, great guy, we just couldn't get him a job. Are you looking for someone this summer? He's an awesome person. Like that, could you imagine if that student gets a job from that process? They're indebted to not just the person, the state bar, and then the law school. So I really think that point that you just made is I never thought of it that way, but I think it's quite impactful because those are the folks that I think we need to think about. But I still think that, and again, this is not a knock on, I've met great lawyers at big law and the government in-house, small law firm solos, and I met lawyers and big law, small law firms, government in-house, all through. And I like I said, right, just different environments. What do you want out of life, right? Different things for different strokes for different folks. But it's not that it's pushed. The idea, and I think what Kristen and we've talked about in the show in the past, is that it's made to seem like the only thing, and it comes with the autopilot package. Like, you do this, you work hard for 3 years, you check all these boxes, you get in here, and you no longer have to take extreme ownership of your own career. So, like, let's go back to the story that you had talked about, because I think the details are actually much more interesting than just, you just wanted to just, talk about it, but not talk about it. But your Seventh Circuit, like how you started arguing I think you started, this was when you were an associate at a large firm. You wanted an opportunity to argue before the Seventh Circuit. You weren't getting those opportunities because rightfully so or unrightfully so, they felt you had not earned that. But you didn't take no for an answer, and you decided to sort of take ownership of the situation. How did you do that?
And now, a word from our sponsors. The Ultimate Pass truly is an ultimate deal. With access to everything State Bar of Wisconsin Pinnacle produces for CLE, all for one low price. Learn about your options at wisbar.org/ultimatepass. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Well, it was interesting. I was in my first year towards the end, and at the time, I don't remember what it was, but the Seventh Circuit had a program for appellate brief writing. And I signed up for it, and I remember going down to Chicago, and they put you into small groups, and they had team leaders. And it turned out my team leader was Pam Pepper, Judge Pepper, who's now the chief judge. And at the time, she was doing criminal defense work. And so, we were the only, I think it was a group of 4 or 5 that she was leading. And so I'm from Milwaukee, so I'd see her. So that was one path. And then the other thing that helped, the late dean of Marquette Law, Howard Eisenberg, I'd gotten to know him, and he actually, I'm just amazed at the amount of work that he had. he would look over my briefs.
Oh, wow.
We'd have a conversation.
Oh,
I'd
wow.
send him the brief, and he would take me to lunch right over here, right across from where we're at, over the MAC, because he was another get up very early workout kind of guy. So, breakfast at 7
Did he
a.m.
take pictures? Oh, there was an Instagram then. Okay.
But he would talk to me about the cases. In fact, I mean, it was so impactful. When he died, I found out the day he died, I immediately called the Seventh Circuit, and I said, I know he's got a lot of open cases. I'll take 2. And I was at Michael Best, so I ended up with 2 cases. And then it turned out that the 2 cases I had, they're criminal cases. You're going to lose. We lost, and both clients wanted appeals to the Supreme Court. So in a 6-week period of time, I did 2 cert petitions as well. And so that was a great experience. But again, there was someone who was kind enough to share time with me, mentor, answer questions, kind of bounce some ideas off about what you want to do. So, the Seventh Circuit's always looking for volunteers. The Eastern District of Wisconsin, the Western District, they're always looking for people doing pro bono. I mean, just the opportunities that are out there are enormous. And I do think, you hear it'd be hard as a small or solo lawyer to take on like a death penalty case type thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are firms that's what they do. They'll take on a death penalty case, or they'll take something, and those people will say some of those are the best cases they've ever had because the people are the most grateful. Nothing is more heartwarming to me now than looking in the eye of a client, someone who doesn't have a lot of money, or they're poor, and we've won, and I'm handing them a check for life-altering money, and just the hugs and just kissing you and just the gratitude. I mean, I have people today. I was joking. I was in court mediation this morning with Judge Edelman, and we were trying to mediate one case, and I brought up an example, and then Judge Edelman's like, well, I'm the one that sent you that case. And it was this police brutality case that I had. And I said, well, the funny thing is that plaintiff I'm friends with, I was on the phone with him yesterday. I'm helping him with some other stuff. I mean, we are life friends now.
Mm-hmm.
He sends me messages on Facebook. He'll, he knows I have a license plate that says Black Jedi. So he sends me little Darth Vader type figurines or something if he picks something up. Just, that kind of thing. I don't have that with corporate clients. It's fine. It's the job. But you get some people that you've done this for them, and you've altered their life. And, you're never going to, the downside of the law is in 50, 60 years, you don't look back and say, yeah, I wrote that brief. It's not like a building where you can take your kids and say, I built that, right? And so you want something that's impactful. And that's what I think we can do, but you have to turn around and chart that path and say, where do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years? And are there mentors that'll help me there? Are there books I should be reading? I tell people all the time, people are so worried about billable hours, and they focus on that instead of, looking at the calendar and saying, when's the next trial in federal court? Well, I know there's a trial starting on Monday, so I'm going to make sure it doesn't settle. And Monday, I'm going to go watch the trial. I don't need to watch a trial, but I'm going to go watch because, you can watch lawyers. You can always pick up one little nugget. You can watch the judge and pick up a little nugget. You could take some work there and do some work, but stop focusing on everything as a billable hour and say, how do I develop my craft?
So how do young lawyers now? Nate, I want you to talk about this from your perspective now, being Nate Cade, successful civil rights lawyer, hasn't had you have your own firm. You can do that. How's a second year in big law going to justify spending hours watching a trial and not billing?
Because they turn around and they say, if they have a significant other, the sacrifice today is worth it for the future. So they come in on a Saturday, or they take work home on a Saturday, or they take work home on a Sunday. If you think about it, I know, Emil, you're a big social media guy, right?
I'm not a big social media guy, okay?
Well, it's kind of hard to turn on Facebook or Instagram or anything without seeing Emil. And that's whether it's with shirt on or off and everything else.
Oh, geez.
Or hanging out with your boys and, the Nigeria crew and weddings and flying to Abu Dhabi and everything else.
Why are you outing me like this?
Well,
I thought we're friends.
My point is you can sacrifice 3 hours, and again, you could take stuff to court. You could take reading. I had a trial not too long ago that was in July. It was supposed to go in January of last year, and it was against the city of Milwaukee. And the lead lawyer, she ended up leaving the city, but at the time she was supposed to try the case. So I knew her, but I never watched her. And it turned out that while I had a trial going, and the jury was deliberating, she was trying a case. So I go down and I'm watching her trial. And someone else from the city attorney's office, he saw me in the back and he came over, and Judge Griesbach had come down from Green Bay, and he goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Game film." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Game film. You watch your opponent, right? So you learn, how do they present? What are their little ticks? There were things that she was doing, and I'm like, okay, I can object if she does that in my trial. I understand how she's making arguments to the judge, or how she's doing the evidence, how she's putting things on, what's her tone, her cadence, her style. That's worth 3 hours.
Yeah, I agree. That's I think that's amazing. I just think people sometimes don't realize that they have that time, but it's about making the time, right? And understanding that, sacrifices, right? You still have to make your hours, but this actually goes towards your craft. This you can take anywhere with you.
I'll give you another example. Another thing to do, which I've done, is I've had trials with certain judges where I'll take a pro bono case that's going to go before my other case. So what better way to learn the judge than to take a case, a lot of these cases.
Calculated.
Well, but you learn the style. And to be able to say to your client, I've tried a case with this judge, I've done the objections, I know what's going on up at the sidebar, right? If you're not thinking about that, you don't just show up. But you get, remember, you're also getting credibility with the court, because at some point you have to make certain statements to the court, and the court has to believe you. And if they've dealt with you many times before, they know you're not lying to them. They believe your veracity if you make statements. So sacrificing today on something, imagine what that's going to pay off in your career in a few years.
You mentioned something before we got on air. I think it's important to touch on. You said, now you have your firm, you have younger lawyers who work with you, and you said you try to encourage them to be entrepreneurial, and so if they want to do new things, a couple of questions you ask them, and I think that could create the blueprints for younger lawyers or lawyers who are in places where they're not in positions to necessarily decide what they're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, to have those conversations with their employers or their partners. Can you just remind me of that again?
And now, a word from our sponsors. Would you like to implement new efficiencies into your law practice but don't know where to begin? Practice 411, the State Bar of Wisconsin's Law Office Management Assistance Program, is the place to start. Don't wait. Contact Practice 411 today for a complimentary and confidential consultation at 1-800-957-4670. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Sure. So one of the things that I always say is, I have no problem if there's an area of the law or something you want to practice. Let me know how we're going to make money. Let me know what's going to happen. Do you have sample complaints and discovery from that type of case, right? And you can look things up and find things. How are we going to get clients? Do we have to advertise? Tell me those things, right? So that's the first level. And the second level is, we give it a go. And if you're a loss leader, I don't mind losing the first few cases. I don't mind putting the money in and costs and not recuperating it. But at some point, you have to say, okay, can we continue to do this? Or do we have to abandon ship on this area? And being comfortable with, you may not make money, but I also want to see that you're trying, that you've thought about all of the other, it's not just saying, hey, let's do medical malpractice.
Like, have a plan.
Have a plan.
Don't make me come up with your plan.
Correct.
For the new stuff that you want to do.
Absolutely.
Take ownership of that.
Right.
all that. Well, Nate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. I think I'm going to have you back here again in the future because you're just so dynamic and the things you could talk about. But if there's some last words you wanted to leave our audience, we don't have viewers, do we? We don't do videos.
We
Chris?
do videos sometimes.
Okay.
Hello.
I never see the videos, so I just act like we don't have videos. That
Parting
means it's
words, Nate.
probably-
Parting
okay.
words.
Parting words, Nate.
The thought that I want people to go with is, unlike when you were young in grade school, even high school, there's no one who's going to literally walk you through, here's the next event. This is what happens next, right? You know, imagine going from high school and you get dropped off in college. And for a lot of colleges, freshman year, you're in a big lecture hall. No one knows if you're in class. No one's checking up on you. And I think a lot of that is like your career. You've got to make some choices. And so what is it that you want to get out of it? And you could sit back and do nothing. You could sit back and kind of go along for the ride. Or you could turn around and say, I want to emulate this person. I want to, argue in the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, what's the plan? And let's talk about, if that's your 10-year plan, how do we get there? And you work backwards, like anything else in life.
That's awesome. It seems like basic advice, but it's important advice, and I think we all need to hear that.
It
So.
sounds so much better when you put
It does.
Put
When you-
it like a closing argument.
know,
of
you-
some
you
sort.
put a
you're not in
nice bow
court,
on it.
man. Like, chill out.
Put a nice bow on it. I like it. Thank you. I know you're super busy, so we appreciate your time.
Well, Nate, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Give it up for the Black Jedi. Oh, we don't have an audience, so if there was one, this would be a time where they would clap. Well, hey, it was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Nate. And best of luck in everything that you're doing. You're doing some pretty important stuff, especially on the civil rights and the police brutality cases. And I look up to you in that regard. And you've been gracious enough, at least, to mentor me and pick up my calls. And I do call you a lot
You say
at
that.
random times.
Unscheduled time.
On schedule. Why do we have to be so contrived? Never mind. But hey, thank you so much. Means a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele, and we'll catch you next time.